Hello again, my dear students. Let us begin a new lesson today. Lesson number 5, Crafts and Industries. Here we shall discuss Indian industry and trade before the British period. We shall also learn about the English East India Company, how they come to take over India, and also the Industrial Revolution and its impact on other countries. By the end of the lesson, I would like to request you to read your textbook, chapter 5, page number 52 to 54 for better understanding. Now let us see Indian industry and trade before the British period. In Mughal times, different crafts and industries were flourishing in different urban centers. There was no formal industrial system in India. Rural cottage industries, urban domestic industries, and royal karkhanas or workshops produce a variety of high-quality goods. Apart from towns which specialize in craft production, craftspeople also settle in high number in export centers along the coast. The urban handicrafts of India enjoyed a worldwide reputation for excellence. In his book, The Awakening of America, V.F. Culverton writes, "From ancient days when Indian fabrics, gems, carpets, and mosaics adorned the public and private buildings of Rome, down to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the world looked to India for its most arresting and exciting wares. Maritime trade also flourished under the Mughals. India was renowned for fine textiles, muslin, silk, precious stones, and handicrafts. All these changed with the arrival of the European trading companies."
The East India Company. The coming of the British to India was heralded by the formation of the East India Company in 1600 by a charter from the Queen of England. The company was initially set up to foster and expand trade in the East Indies and Far East. From a company trading in spice and raw materials for the growing industries in England, the company took over the reins of the government of the areas where it traded through three methods, namely subsidiary alliance, direct possession, and through the policy of the doctrine of lapse. Initially, it set up factories in the outposts of its trading partner to enable smooth movement of materials from the partners to England. Later, they built fortresses to safeguard their factories, and finally, they interfered in the administration of the small kingdoms that existed there during that time and took sides with the different rulers. The subsidiary alliance allowed the British to station their army in the kingdom and also a resident to look after their interests. Invariably, the resident took over the reins of the government. Slowly, the king became a puppet in the resident's hands, and sooner or later, the kingdom was taken over by the British. In other cases, they waged war with the kingdoms and won the kingdom. The last method adopted was what was called the doctrine of lapse, where the king who did not have a natural heir could not adopt an heir and the kingdom automatically lapsed into British territory. This was against the belief of the Hindus and created a lot of discontent. From 1600 to 1857, the company reigned supreme in India and other Asian and African countries, colonizing many areas and extending the British Empire. Perhaps the biggest colony that the British possessed during that time was India, both in terms of size and extent. Having a foothold in a country that was a gateway between the East and the West proved to be a jackpot for the British. Other European countries too tried their hands at colonization, but did not get to sustain what they got. The trading company slowly now became the center of political power in India, and with the blessings of the British government started ruling the country with the help of a Governor General later known as the Viceroy. The end of the company rule came with a mutiny in 1857 when the Queen decided to rule directly and asked all the company officials to return. From 1858, the British government directly ruled India till 1947.
Today, we're going to learn about a period of history very important and very revolutionary, Today, we're going to learn about the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is a stage of history that goes from 1780 to 1850 and began in England. For almost the entire history of mankind, life had been based on agriculture and livestock. At the end of the 18th century, the Englishman James Watt invented, or rather perfected, the steam engine. Until then, the artisans had been dedicated to the manufacturing of utensils with their own hands in small workshops, but with the arrival of the steam engine, that changed forever. This machine used the energy of steam to transform it into power and moving other machines. These new machines were applied to the industry and began to do the work that the artisans used to do. So the small artisan workshops were disappearing, giving way to big factories. The steam engine was also used for transport, and the first trains and steamboats were manufactured, which facilitated trade and travel between cities and countries. Europe was filled with trains. During the Industrial Revolution, the Royal Society, dominated by the nobility, stopped being as important as it was, and the urban society, dominated by the bourgeois, started to appear. The bourgeois were normal people who had become powerful and rich thanks to trade. Since they had a lot of money, they started investing in technology and were the first to build factories. The workers, also called proletarians, were the people who did not have wealth. Not being able to make a living in the countryside or in the villages, they emigrated to the big cities to work in the factories. At first, they worked in very bad conditions and for very little money, meaning that many children had to work on very hard and dangerous tasks so that their families could feed themselves. The workers asked for rights to work in a dignified and safe way, and the owners, the bourgeois, did not want to give it to them. After many conflicts, strikes and fights, the workers managed to make the workday last 8 hours and allowed them to rest on Sundays or take vacation days. And also, children were protected so they did not have to work anymore. Today, we continue to use many of these rights, and also many of the machines we use are developments of those first steam engines. You already know that knowing the past allows us to understand the present and improve the future. Goodbye, friends, until the next video.
Colonialization and imperialism. The Industrial Revolution in Europe ushered in an era of machine-made goods and scope for markets. In order that the never-ending demand for raw materials and also markets where these goods could be sold at cheap prices, the European countries started their quest for territorial expansion. Over a period of time, this turned out to be a competition as to who could colonialize and govern better. The voyages of discovery undertaken at this time also propelled the need to occupy territory which had huge natural resources waiting to be exploited. The bonus was cheap labor also available. This was the background with which imperialism started. What does imperialism mean? Imperialism is when a mother country takes over a smaller nation or colony for political, social, and/or economic reasons. Imperialism can be broadly divided into two phases, namely Old Imperialism and New Imperialism. Basically, there was not much difference between the two, but the policy of acquiring control was slightly different. In the initial phase of imperialism, the European countries found new trade routes and established factories in the places they had trade with. Slowly, on the pretext of safeguarding these factories, they built fortresses and also gained power with the local leaders. By dividing the kings amongst themselves, they took over the territory for rule and soon became masters. This policy they adopted in North and South America, Far East, Asia, and Africa. They exploited the raw materials and cheap labor available and took it for the thriving industries. The finished goods were again sent to the colonies, as they were called, and sold there at exorbitant prices, thus ruining the local industries. In the age of new imperialism, they established vast empires and set up administrative units for the benefit of the mother nation. This was motivated by the economic needs of the Second Industrial Revolution that had taken place in Europe during this period, and had created drastic changes in many industries, and raw material for feeding the new demand became necessary. What were the efforts of this policy of colonial expansion? It had both positive and negative effects. The positive effects were new modes of transportation and communication, hitherto in the colonies, now became a reality. Good governance based on the rule of law came into existence. Setting up of judicial system also was a benefit for the colonies. On the flip side, these colonies were exploited thoroughly and caused a drain of wealth from the poorer nations. Probably the worst effect of this was causing the First World War.